السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم. اسماعيل ده ما شاء الله سيد. بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. Okay, we'll do a quick recap inshallah ta'ala with regards to this book. So this is just a quick read, an informal reading of Ḥilyah Ṭālib al-ʿIlm. And Ḥilyah Ṭālib al-ʿilm is a book that a sheikh called Bakr Abu Zayd wrote with regards to the etiquettes or things that a student needs to have or should have to adorn himself with, and also some things that he should keep away from. And we're also relying on and reading from the Sharḥ of Sheikh Muhammad ibn Salih al-Uthaymeen. And the author, whenever I mention the word author, it means Sheikh Bakr Abu Zayd. Whenever I say Sheikh, it normally refers to Sheikh Uthaymeen unless otherwise stated. The author mentioned 65 points in this book, or 66 rather, 66 points, and these 66 points were split over 7 chapters or 7 sections. The first section was entitled The Etiquettes of the Seeker with His Inner Self. And under this first chapter, the author rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned 15 points. We'll just quickly run through those 15 points. The first point, knowledge is worship. The second point, be adherent to the path of the Salaf as-Salih. The third point, commit to fearing Allah, having taqwa of Allah. The fourth point, continual observance of Allah, i.e. muraqabah. The fifth point, lower your wing and put arrogance and pride behind you. The sixth point, contentment and zuhud. Seventh, adorn yourself with the splendor of knowledge. 8, adorn yourself with honor, muru'ah. Number 9, enjoying masculine qualities, for males obviously. Number 10, forsaking luxury. 11, to avoid the gatherings of vain speech. 12, avoid commotion. 13, adorn yourself with gentleness. 14th, contemplation. And 15th, firmness and confirmation. And then last week we started chapter number 2, which deals with, or was entitled, The Methodology of Seeking Knowledge, which is what you see on the screen at the moment. The methodology of seeking knowledge. And this has 2 points, point number 16 and 17. The methodology of seeking knowledge and its levels, that's point number 16. And point number 17 is to acquire knowledge from the mashayikh, from the scholars. Last week we started point number 16, which was the methodology. How does a person, what are the steps, the practical steps in terms of seeking knowledge? And the Shaykh, the author, rahimahullah, mentioned 3 quotes, then gave us a point, and then he brought 3 ayat. And those 3 quotes, what we took from them was that a person needs to have the usul. Whoever does not study the foundations will end up never reaching, i.e. never reaching knowledge, never reaching the attainment of knowledge. And then the second quote was, whoever tries to acquire knowledge all in one go will lose it all in one go. And that indicated the process of tadarruj, having gradual, systematic lessons and learning. And then he also mentioned that cramming knowledge into one's ear will cause the person to become lost, the understanding of the person to become lost, i.e. the person who tries to learn too much in one go will end up becoming confused. طيب Ismaili there?
نعم.
Okay. Alaykum salam wa rahmatullah. So then the author rahimahullah went on to mention that therefore, after mentioning these three quotes, therefore then you must know, O student, that you have to get these foundations under your belt. You need to have proper, solid foundations to build your knowledge upon. And he gave us, okay, how do you do that? And the main thing he mentioned is, we won't go into it, but he gave us 6 steps. 6 steps. We'll go into just the steps that he mentioned. Those 6 steps were, which is what you can hear. Oh, you can see here. So those are the 3 quotes there on the board. So whoever does not perfect the foundations is prevented from reaching. Whoever wants to attain knowledge in one go will lose it in one go. And it was also said, overcrowding the knowledge in the ear misguides one's understanding. Then he brought the 3 ayat. And then he gave us these 6 steps. These 6 steps, if we understand them, then we will have an idea of who is a student of knowledge. Instead of just saying, I'm a student of knowledge, so-and-so student of knowledge. Okay, what are these steps for someone to be a student, someone to learn something? So he said that in every subject, you do the following. Number 1, memorize a concise book on it. Notice, memorize. Not just you sat in a class, not just you were with Sheikh so-and-so and you were smiling and you have a notepad with some notes on it. No, he's saying memorize. Memorize a concise book. Number 2, perfect it. I mastered that book with a proficient sheikh. So people say, I studied this book, I studied that book. You ask them, okay, what does the book say? Even if you cannot tell me word for word, this book is, the sheikh's book is, you can find it in English as The Etiquette of Seeking Knowledge, from Sheikh Bakr Abu Zaid, in Arabic, Ḥilyah Ṭālib al-ʿIlm. So the second point was perfect or master that book with a proficient sheikh. So some people say, I studied the book already. You ask him, what does the book contain? He doesn't know. So not only has he not memorized it word for word, but he doesn't even know a breakdown of the book. That's a big problem. Big problem. 3, do not engage yourself with longer books in different subjects before you have that foundation, i.e. before step 1 and 2, and you have that foundation ready. Don't go to the big books. Number 4, don't swap from one concise book, i.e. the beginner's book that you're trying to memorize and study with a teacher. Don't swap one day you're doing this book, next week you change it. Next week you change it again. Don't be like that. Unless there is a reason that necessitates that. For example, you move country and the people of this new country that you moved to are on a different madhab. So you were studying Hanbali fiqh, and then you move to another country and the only teachers there can only teach you Hanafi fiqh. So then you might have to change book. Okay, that's a good reason, because you can't carry on with the previous book. But just simply because you just became bored or you found a new teacher, even if the new teacher might be a bit better, but if you keep doing that, there's always going to be a teacher that's going to be a bit better. If you keep doing that in life, you'll never complete a book, let alone perfect it or become proficient in it. Number 5, capture the benefits, the fawaid, capture them, write them down. Number 4, mentally prepare yourself to seek knowledge and progress in it. And with all of these things, we spoke about them with some detail. No YouTube, because this is not a proper lesson. We just in having a nice Friday night. Alhamdulillah. Okay. We stop there. Today we're going to, inshaAllah ta'ala, talk about other important aspects with regards to the methodology of learning. But just those 6 points, imagine those 6 points, the first 2, for example, are not just with one book. That's just if you want to study one subject. So every subject, the student should have that. The Sheikh said in every subject. So in tajweed, in nahu, in sarf, in aqidah, and so on and so on and so on. So it's not, it's not just a title a person takes and that's it. And it's not like university studies, where in university studies you get glimpses of certain books or certain extracts from books, and you get a concept in your head, but you haven't mastered a book in that subject. So a person has to also be aware of how the different ways of studying are. Now, Ismail, you ready to read, inshallah, from وَكَانَ? Go ahead.
وكان من رأي ابن عربي المالكي ألا يخلط الطالب إلى القرآن، لكن تأقبه ابن
خلدون
أو
خلدون
بأن الأوائل لا تساعد على هذا، فإن المقدم هو دراسة القرآن الكريم وحفظه، لأن الولد ما دام في الحجر ينقاد لحكم، فإذا تجاوز البلوغ صعد قدره. أما الخلط بالعلمين فأكثر، فهذا يختلف باختلاف المتعلمين بالفهم والنية.
Okay, so here the author rahimahullah mentions 2 points, or we can summarize into 2 main points. Number 1, what does the person start with? And number 2, can the person study more than one subject at the same time? Can the person study more than one subject at the same time? So here you have 2 different kind of views that are given. In summary, a person looks to his ability or her ability. If he finds that he can study more than one subject at the same time, then go ahead. But there are some issues that a person should be aware of. So Shaykh Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala says, with regards to the statement, أَلَّا يَخْلُطَ الطَّالِبُ فِي التَّعْلِيمِ بَيْنَ عِلْمَيْنِ, that the student should not mix between 2 sciences. He says, هَذَا لَيْسَ عَلَى إِطْلَاقِهِ, this is not left unrestricted. And this sentence here by Shaykh Uthaymeen is an important sentence that comes time and time again in the book, and it shows you that just because you read something in a sheikh's book, in an author's book, for example, or your teacher says something, doesn't mean that that's it, that's left unrestricted. There are no quyud, or there are no restrictions to that statement. Rather, Shaykh Uthaymeen says, بَلْ يَجِبُ أَن يُقَيَّدْ, but rather it is necessary that he must be given some restrictions. So, and then Shaykh Uthaymeen goes on to say some other things, but the point that he says, it depends on the person. If the person sees that he has the ability to study more than one subject at the same time, so remember the 6 steps. You start a subject, you memorize a book, and you study it with a teacher. Okay, you master it with a teacher. Okay, maybe you do that on Mondays, and on Tuesdays you have a different subject. Can you do that? Before you finish the first book on Mondays, for example, a book in Tajweed, can you now start also a book in Nahu at the same time? So Monday you do Tajweed and you don't finish the whole book. On Tuesday you do Nahu, and then next Monday you still carry on Tajweed, and next Tuesday you're still doing Nahu. Can you combine between knowledge like that? Shaykh Uthaymeen says it depends. You see what you have. But now pay attention. But be careful. وَلَكِنْ لِيَحْذَرَ نَشَاطَ الْبَدْءِ, that the person be careful of the beginning enthusiasm, the enthusiasm that you have at the beginning. When you first start seeking knowledge, you hear a motivational talk, the khutbah at the masjid is interesting, and you say, you know what, I need to be a alim, I want to have knowledge, and so you want to get all the knowledge. So you start to do 3, 4 different subjects. Be careful of that, because always at the start, the enthusiasm is big. And he goes on, فَإِنَّ بَعْضَ النَّاسِ أَوَّلُ مَا يَبْدَأُ يَجِدُ نَفْسَهُ نَشِيطًا. Because a person, when he first starts something, there are some people that when they first start something, they find themselves very enthusiastic. يريد أن يلتهم العلوم جميعا فإذا به ينكس إلى الوراء لأنه بالغ وأخطأ في التقدير والواجب ألا يكلف نفسه ما لا يطيق بل عليه أن يتزن في طلبه حتى يستمر. So he's saying that a person may put too much on himself. He tries too hard. And even in Quran sometimes when you first, a certain lecture gets to you, you want to memorize 2, 3, 4, 5 pages a day. But you're not going to be able to keep that up after a week. And then you end up spending a month not memorizing anything. Rather, the person should be balanced and take it bit by bit. So if you're going to study a subject, like I've mentioned to you many times, even if you only do one lesson a week, just make sure you memorize your lesson, you do your homework, you know what was said, you revise what was previously done in the lesson, and that one lesson a week, you'll find barakah inside it. You won't find that some people that are doing 5 lessons a week, they won't find it because they will do 5 and they won't finish 5. They won't revise any of the lesson. So they'll forget it after a month. So a person, if he finds himself having the ability to do more than one science at the same time, then go ahead. But ideally, the person should ask his teacher, because the teacher will be able to give you things to see if you can handle it or not. And then the second thing that was mentioned was, what does a person start with? And generally speaking, it depends. So as was mentioned in the author's statement, if a person is a baby, as child, then he memorizes Quran, because that's what he needs to do at that age. If a person is old and he has responsibility, then he memorizes, he learns what is wajib upon him or her, and so forth. There's a certain tartib. Again, the person has to ask the teacher. That's why it's important to have a teacher, because the teacher should be like a mentor to you. It shouldn't be like a university lecturer that he just comes, teaches his dars, and he goes. He doesn't know anything about your life. He doesn't know anything about your level, what other things you've memorized. That's a different type of teacher. What we're talking about here is a mentor who asks you, what have you memorized? What do you know? What have you studied before? Okay, your next step is this, this, and this. And then when you come back the next week, he says, okay, did you do it or not? Okay, if he found it very easy, he might give you a bit extra. If he sees that you're struggling, he might keep it the same, and so on. So those are the 2 points the author rahimahullah ta'ala mentioned. And there's loads of statements that you could put onto this subject. But primarily, if it's someone young, then he studies Quran. And even that, there's a lot of discussion about that with regards to Quran in London, for example. And if it's an older person, then he studies what he needs to study to become a good Muslim. So he memorizes what he's meant to memorize. He learns what is obligatory upon him, and then what is recommended upon him to be a good, upstanding Muslim. Then after that, he starts to become a student of knowledge. Okay, go ahead. If you have any questions in the Zoom, you can just ask anytime, yeah?
وكان من أهل العلم من يدرس الفقه الحنبلي بزاد المستقنع والمقنع لمن بعدهم بخلاف المذهبي، أما المغني بخلاف العالم، ولا يسمح طبقة الأولى أن تجلس في درس الثانية، وهكذا دفعا
Go ahead, sorry.
للتسويف.
So now, here the author is giving us an example. Okay, what are the different levels that a person goes through? Because we said you're going to memorize, learn a certain book, then move up, go to the next level up, and so forth. Okay, so he gave us an example that they used to study. He said when he used to study Hanbali fiqh in his area, they would start the beginners Zad al-Mustaqni', then al-Muqni' for differences of opinion in the madhab, and then al-Mughni for differences of opinion that are above the madahib, or the madahib and other than them at an advanced level. And they would not let the beginner start at the next level up, so as to eliminate confusion. And Shaykh Uthaymeen mentions that this is some of the people of knowledge do that. And he says at the end of his footnote with regards to this point, he says, وَالْحَاصِلُ أَنَّهُ يَنْبَغِي أَنْ يَرْتَقِيَ الْمُعَلِّمُ بِالطَّلَبَةِ دَرَجَةً فَدَرَجَةً حَتَّى يُتْقِنُوا مَا تَعَلَّمُوهُ. And the point is, at the end of, or the summary, or what The point being that the teacher has to bring the students up level by level, so that they will master that which they are being taught. And with regards to not letting people sit in the classes that are above their level, and this makes sense. It's so important, especially for us. But Shaykh Uthaymeen here says that he doesn't do that. He says, I can't do that. As for me, I can't do that. لا أستطيع. ولهذا أجمع بين الصغير والكبير فيما ندرسه من الكتب. And for that reason, we combine between the small or the young and the big or the older in what we study with regards to the book. He says, for example, we're not going to study a book and then when a new group of people comes, we start again from the start. Rather, we go, and the young person, the Saghir, he might struggle at the start, but then he'll find himself and he'll be able to carry on. What's the point that I'm making by mentioning what Shaykh Uthaymeen says here? Is the fact that just because now the author has one view, and he says that they did not let students sit in the other circles. Now Shaykh Uthaymeen doesn't do that. As students now, when we read, if we are students or as just Muslims, when we read this, we have to be careful. If we see a teacher doing something different to what we've learnt, it doesn't mean that, oh, this guy is totally wrong or whatever the case. We have to understand what is the mas'ala. So there are different ways of teaching. There are different ways that a teacher may do things. So we shouldn't just jump straight away and say, oh, well, this is bad manners, or this is not appropriate for the teacher to do that, and so forth. Naam, go ahead.
واعلم أن أكثر المختصرات والمطولات التي يؤسس عليها الطالب والتلقي لدى المشايخ تختلف غالبا من كثر إلى كثر باختلاف المذاهب وما نشأ عليه علماء ذلك الكتب من إتقان هذا المختصر والموروث دون غيره.
Okay. Shaykh Uthaymeen says, ما ذكره المؤلف في هذه الفقرة صحيح، فقد يكون الإنسان في بلد مذهبهم هو المذهب الشافعي، فتجد العلماء يدرسون أو يبنون أصول تدريسهم على كتب الشافعية، وفي بلد ينهج في أهله مذهب الإمام أحمد، تجد العلماء يدرسون كتب هذه المذهب وهلم جرة. So in different places there's going to be a different list of books. Again, don't get confused. We'll mention a couple of things here. Number one, although there are going to be different books in different areas, especially in the madhabs, okay, there is a benefit, or it's important that we study these concise books. And later on, we're going to talk about, the Sheikh is going to talk about pamphlets or books that teachers put together, okay, as opposed to mutun or classical books or well-recognized books, and the benefit of that. But there are going to be differences in terms of books that you find in different areas that teachers will teach. Okay, question: how do I manage between both studies of my deen and studies of the dunya? You do what you can. So normally what I say to brothers or sisters, as a general Muslim, try to have one lesson a week where you study Quran, you learn how to read, and when I say you learn how to read, you practice, so you can read fluently from anywhere in the Quran once a week. And then try to do Arabic once a week. And then one Islamic studies lesson a week. That's it. That's all you have to do. If you can't do that, then do one of those things. Do Quran. If you can do a bit of Arabic, do a bit of Arabic. But the point is, just try to find what will be a good balance for you. And the first step in that is try to find a teacher. Try to find a teacher who will be able to tell you, okay, do this, try this, and so forth. So, inshallah, it's not going to be difficult. But the point is, when you have free time, how do you use that free time? That's the question. So the studies that are to do with the dunya, or work in the dunya, you have to do it because you have to survive. But the free time that you have, that's what's going to be seen. So if someone has 10 hours free a week and they use those 10 hours in seeking knowledge in a proper way, they will learn a lot. And if a person has 1 hour free a week and he uses that to seek knowledge, he will learn because Allah will put barakah, inshallah. But if a person has 50 hours free and he spends 10 hours, he's only spent a small part of his free time. So the barakah that he'll have is not the same as the other person who had only 10 hours free and he spent those 10 hours in seeking knowledge. There's a difference between the two. So bit by bit, inshallah ta'ala, the person will get it. Khair. Um, so here the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, was just mentioning that there's going to be different books in different areas. Don't worry too much about it. And he's going to go now into what the scholars in his area, which was Saudi Arabia, go in terms of books. So we're going to start to discuss some of the books that that the author mentions, and also Sheikh Uthaymeen speaks about. And many of those books are accessible to us, and most of the time in the UK we have teachers that have come from those areas, so they're probably teaching similar books to that, and we'll add some things with regards to what is specific to us who are perhaps non-Arabic speakers. Okay, we'll restart the room and then we'll come back. Bismillah ta'ala. You ready? Ismail, go ahead.
والحال هنا تختلف من طالب إلى الآخر لاختلاف الآراء فيه والفهوم وقوة الاستعداد وضعفه وبرودة الذهن وتوقده. وقد كان الطالب في قدرنا بعد مرحلة كالتأكيد وأخذ بحفظ القرآن الكريم يمر بمراحل 3 لدى المشايخ في دروس المساجد.
So no. Go ahead. المبتدئين. Go ahead.
ثم المتوسطين ثم المتمكنين.
Okay, so the author now, rahimahullah, is mentioning what used to happen in their area, what happens in the area. So notice the first step was what? The person memorizes Quran. So now we have normal Muslims, the general Muslims, and then we have the student of knowledge. Then you have the scholars, right? The general Muslim, he has a certain knowledge that he has to learn to be a general Muslim. Okay. Now, we have to make sure that we are at the level of general Muslims. There's like Sheikh Sharḥ mentioned when he came, he mentioned there, I saw in the video actually, not when he came, that some people, when you say that they're going to study durus al-muhimma li'ammat al-ummah, important lessons for the general Muslim or for the Muslim nation or for the general Muslim nation, he says some people, they say, oh, but we're not the general Muslims, we are students. And he said, okay, we're going to test you. If you know what is in this book, then okay, you are the best of the general Muslims, and inshallah you're going to be a student of knowledge. And if you don't know what is in this book, then you are even lower than the general Muslim, because you think you know and you don't know. So now, us as people, we need to know what is generally obligatory upon us as general Muslims. What do we need to know? That's a beginner's level. Then if we want to be a student of knowledge, that's a separate path now. We've gone past the beginner's level, we achieve what the general Muslim needs to do. Now we're going to start seeking knowledge. Okay, generally speaking, you start with the Quran. So after they memorize the Quran, then they have the beginners, the intermediates, and the advanced, or those who are capable. So there should be a focus for this. Anyone who claims to be a student of knowledge should either have memorized the Quran, or there should be a focus on memorizing the Quran, especially if they started when they were older, or if they are reverts who already have entered adulthood and have not memorized the Quran. Okay, maybe there's a concession in terms of they have to do it bit by bit as they go along. But there's an important part, the Quran has to be an important part for the student of knowledge in general. And then there are three levels, generally speaking, in the masajid. Okay, the beginners, the intermediates, and the advanced. Okay, so now he's going to go to the books, inshallah ta'ala. Go ahead. In Tawheed.
ففي التوحيد ثلاثة الأصول وأدلتها والقواعد الأربع ثم كشف الشبهات ثم كتاب التوحيد أربعتها للشيخ محمد بن عبد الوهاب رحمه الله تعالى. هذا في توحيد العبادة.
Okay, so now he mentions those three books. Four books rather in Tawheed al-Ibadah. ثلاثة الأصول, where he mentions الأصول الثلاثة, قواعد الأربع. Then he says كشف الشبهات, and then كتاب التوحيد. And we normally say, based upon what we've seen from teachers, again Sheikh Sharḥ mentions it, ثلاثة الأصول, قواعد الأربع, كتاب التوحيد, then كشف الشبهات. So as we mentioned, start with أصول الثلاثة, construct that creed. أصول الثلاثة is a book that teaches you what the Muslim should know, should believe. Then قواعد الأربعة, which is a refutation of what Muslims should not be into, how to know shirk. Then كتاب التوحيد, and that again is teaching the Muslim what is right with regards to the rights of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and what is not right in terms of the shirk. It's building a person's iman and understanding of what they should and shouldn't do. And then Kitab al-Tawheed, with a competent teacher, Kashf al-Shubuhat, you should read, because he will lead you through the difficulties. I.e., Kashf al-Shubuhat should be read and studied with a competent teacher. Why is that emphasized? It's emphasized because it's a book which deals with doubts. So if a person doesn't have the strong foundations that are mentioned in Kitab al-Tawheed, then he may become confused by the doubts in Kashf al-Shubuhat, especially if he hasn't got a teacher that will lead him through those arguments that are made in that book. So it's important that the student studies Kitab al-Tawheed before Kashf al-Shubuhat. Shaykh Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala mentions here هناك أسباب أخرى أيضا وهي قوة الاستعداد بالعلم وتلقيه وضعف ذلك وكذلك كثرة المشاغل وقلتها. المهم أن الاختلاف في القدرات وسرعة التحصيل بين الطلاب وارد، لكن ما ذكره أولا التدرج مبني على الغالب. قد يكون في المبتدئين من يمكن أن تدرسه المقنع. Okay. The previous concept that we mentioned about tadarruj, that the student studies this book and that book and so forth, even the levels of books that a student studies depends. This is generally what is said, but it depends from student to student, Shaykh Uthaymeen is mentioning here. Okay. So he mentions those books, Usul al-Thalatha, Qawaid al-Arba, and so forth. Shaykh Uthaymeen discusses some of these books, but I don't think we need to go into discussion because those books are well known to most of the people that are listening in anyway. Go ahead.
وفي توحيد الأسماء والصفات العقيدة الواسطية ثم الحموية ثم الحموية والتدمرية ثلاثتها لشيخ الإسلام ابن تيمية رحمه الله تعالى الطحاوية مع شرحها.
Okay, then the author goes on to mention another group of books, and this is with regards to Aqidah in general, but the first couple are with regards to the Asma wa Sifat. So it says then with regards to Asma wa Sifat, Aqidah al-Wasatiyya. Aqidah al-Wasatiyya, inshallah, we're going to go through it after we finish Kitab al-Tawheed, Kasf al-Shubuhat, then perhaps inshallah Aqidah al-Wasatiyya on the Sunday lesson. And it's a book which talks about Aqidah in general, but it focuses on focuses on the names and attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And there's parts of Aqidat al-Wasatiyah, there's parts of it that are that is rare that a person will find similar words in other books. So it's a very good book that a person should have, and it even includes although it's a book on Aqidah, it includes how the person of the Sunnah, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the Firqatul Najiyah, how they should act, how they should be. So it's an important part. And then the author goes on to mention Al-Hamawiyah wa-Tadmuriyah. Shaykh Uthaymeen says, وَهُمَا رِسَالَتَانْ أَوْسَعَ مِنَ الْعَقِيدَةِ الْوَاسِطِيَّةِ وَلَكِنَّهَا أَجْمَعُ مِنْهُمَا. They are both, so you have two other books, Hamawiyah and Tadmuriyah. Hamawiyah and Tadmuriyah are both wider, i.e. there are more pages. They are longer than Wasatiyah. But Wasatiyah has more points to it, as in it covers a variety of aspects. So Aqidat al-Wasatiyah, names and attributes, the fact that the Quran is speech of Allah. It talks about how the things that will occur on the Day of Judgment. It talks about the fact that how the Muslim should be in terms of the suluk, the way that they transverse in life and so forth. So it deals about many things in Aqidah, whereas Hamawi and Tadmuriyah deal primarily with the names and attributes and with issues to do with Qadr, as the Shaykh rahimahullah ta'ala mentions. And then he goes on to say At-Tahawiyah. At-Tahawiyah, he says, then At-Tahawiyah, and he says an explanation. It has a specific explanation that is done with At-Tahawiyah. At-Tahawiyah is not that long. It can be studied before Tadmuriyah and Hamawiyah, but it should be done with an explanation. Why? Because an explanation of a shaykh will help you to understand some of the phrases that may be misunderstood in At-Tahawiyah. You find that Aqidat al-Tahawiyah sometimes is explained by people of innovation, and they give it a meaning that is not the correct meaning. They give certain phrases that can be misunderstood, meanings that are not correct. So a person has to make sure that he studies that with those tanbihat or those cautionary points explained by a teacher. Then the author rahimahullah ta'ala goes on to mention another set of books. He says in Arabic grammar, نعم.
وفي النحو الآجرومية ثم ملحة الإعراب
ملحة
الحريري ثم قطر الندى لابن هشام والألفية ابن مالك مع شرحها لابن عقيل.
Then the author rahimahullah mentions Arabic grammar. So he says the student should study al-Ajrumiyyah, then Mulhatul I'rab, then Qatrun Nada, then Alfiyat ibn Malik with an explanation of Ibn Aqil. What does Shaykh Uthaymeen says? Shaykh Uthaymeen praises al-Ajrumiyyah. He says it's a very good book. It's Mubarak. It's well laid out. Then what does he say about the other books? He says, with regards to Mulhatul I'rab, قطر الندى, he goes on, هكذا ذكر المؤلف, such, this way mentioned it, the author mentioned it this way, لكني أقول, but I say, الآجرمية ثم يرتقي الطالب إلى الألفية. He does the student does ajrumiyah, then the student will go to alfiyah. So he skipped the other two books, قطر الندى and ملحة الإعراب. He goes from ajrumiyah to alfiyah. أما النحش والأذهان بكتب التي كالتكرار لأولها فلا حاجة. As for repeating books that are like, as for doing other books like قطر الندى and ملحة الإعراب that are like ajrumiyah, it's almost like you're repeating yourself, then there's no need for it. And here, and then he goes on to mention some things about those books. Then he goes on to say finally, فالذي أختاره لطالب العلم أن يبدأ بالآجرومية ثم ألفية ابن مالك مع حفظها. So what I choose for the student is that he starts with Ajrumiyah, then he will do Alfiyat ibn Malik and memorize it. وسماع شرحها من عالم بالنحو وفيها الخير الكثير, and listening to his explanation from a scholar of grammar, and in it is much good, i.e. in the Alfiyah. So here there's 2 points. Number one, if you have a teacher, this is very easy. If you don't have a teacher, it will feel very long. When Sheikh Muhammad Maliki came to London, after Fajr is when he used to have the lessons for the students. The other lessons, yes, they were for students, general Muslims and so forth, but after Fajr, he would have, after the first year and the second year when he came, he would have the lessons in Arabic only and go through books of knowledge, i.e. mutun. So he went through Ajrumiyah. We didn't finish it by the time the trip was finished. But the point is, when he came, Fajr time, we would go through a portion. Okay, we go through a certain amount. He would explain it in the class. Any questions on it, you could ask, and then you'd understand what he said. The rest of the day, you'd memorize what you've covered. So you'd memorize the text, and obviously when you're memorizing the words, you're going to remember the explanation in your head. Then the second day, the next day, you'd come and the Shaykh would give you the next part of the book and the explanation again. You have a class on it, any questions, and the rest of the day from after that Fajr, the rest of the day when you're doing your other work, you're memorizing a new part of Ajrumiyah, revising last class, yesterday's class, and you're memorizing every day, you're going through the book. If you do that, if you have a Shaykh available with you throughout the year like that, you'll finish a lot of books. But because most of us, we don't have a Shaykh like that available, what happens is that we spend months going from one book to another book, and this is why we spend many years. And if you ask somebody, okay, tell me what does Thalathatul Usul cover, the person is stuck. That's a musiba in and of itself. Shaykh Uthaymeen mentions that. Second thing to note is when the scholars now are giving advice on what the person should study, now for Arabic grammar, this is not applicable to somebody who is not in London and doesn't have any knowledge of Arabic language, like he just became Muslim yesterday or he just started practicing. He's not going to start with Ajrumiyah. So he has to study, he has to get an answer from somebody that knows his situation. So he has to start with learning the letters, learning how to read. After he learns how to read, then he will have to do some Quran, practice reading practice reading the Quran, and then he will start with, for example, Medina books. Medina book 1, Medina book 2, then he might do Ajrumiyah, maybe Medina book 3, and so forth. But as for saying, no, I'm going to do Ajrumiyah, and the person doesn't know any Arabic, then he won't understand what's going on. If you have to translate every word in Ajrumiyah, then it's going to be a long way. The easier way is to take Medina book, for example, and the Shaykh gives you a bit of grammar, he gives you some vocabulary, he gives you some sarf and other things. So then you can understand it, even though he doesn't say that this is sarf, this is nahu, this is that, but he gives it to you in a way that is bite-sized, and inshallah you can get through it. Okay, go ahead. A hadith. As for hadith,
وفي الحديث الأربعين للنووي ثم عمدة الأحكام للمقدسي ثم بلوغ المرام لابن حجر والمنتقى لمجد
Okay, now the author rahimahullah goes on to tell us something about hadith. What does the student study when he wants to begin hadith? So he says he starts with al-arba'in al-nawawi, 40 hadith of Imam al-Nawawi. Then he does umdatul ahkam, then bulugh al-maram, then al-muntaqa. Then he starts reading in the 6 books of hadith and other than them. What does Shaykh Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala say? Well, he praises Imam al-Nawawi's 40 hadith. He praises it highly. Then he goes on to say, with regards to Umdatul Ahkam and Bulugh al-Maram, which one should a person do? He says, وَأَرَى أَنْ يَقْتَصِرَ عَلَى بُلُوغِ الْمَرَامِ. And what I see is that the student should stay or should only do Bulugh al-Maram. He doesn't have to do Umdah. He says, لِأَنَّ عُمْدَةَ الْأَحْكَامِ دَاخِلَةٌ فِي بُلُوغِ الْمَرَامِ. Because Umdatul Ahkam is included within Bulugh al-Maram. وأكثر أحاديثها موجودة في بلوغ المرام. And most of its hadith, most of the hadith that are in the book Umdah al-Ahkam can be found in بلوغ المرام. فبلوغ المرام أوسع منها وأشد تحبيرا. بلوغ المرام is wider than Umdah al-Ahkam. And then he brings some lines of poetry which basically mean that if a person can't do everything, if he cannot, for example, manage to do Bulugh al-Maram, then don't leave everything. Then at least do Umdatul Ahkam. Now, this is a point that some scholars would disagree. Some will say, no, you have to do Umdatul Ahkam first. You have to, as in, if you really want to learn it properly. Umdatul Ahkam first, then you can do Bulugh al-Maram. Why? Because there's a certain tadarruj. You don't know, for example, if you'll get to finish Bulugh al-Maram. But at least if you do Umdatul Ahkam, you'll have all or most of the abwab of fiqh, you'll have an evidence inside it. And then Shaykh Uthaymeen goes on to say, there are certain benefits that Umdatul Ahkam has instead of Bulugh al-Maram. But to be honest with most of us here, if I'm totally honest, and Allah knows best, this is going to be determined by your teacher. If you have a teacher that is going to teach you Umdatul Ahkam properly, from start to finish, go ahead. If you have a teacher that's going to do Bulugh al-Maram from start to finish, go ahead. Because right now, there's not going to be many teachers that are going to do either one or both from start to finish with perfection. When I say perfection, I mean in a proper, detailed way. Not too lengthy, but he knows what he needs to do. So most of these, what books you study, remember, is going to be determined by your teacher. It's not going to be determined by what you think is going to be the right way. So those are two, Bulugh al-Maram and Umdat al-Ahkam. And some scholars will mention also Riyadh al-Salihin would come next. And then he mentions al-Muntaqa, and Shaykh Uthaymeen says, وَهُوَ أَكْبَرُ مِنْ بُلُوغِ الْمَرَامِ بِكَثِيرٍ. And this book is much bigger than Bulugh al-Maram. لكنه أضعف منه في بيان مرتبة الحديث. But it is weaker than Bulugh al-Maram. Al-Muntaqa is weaker than Bulugh al-Maram because it does not mention the level of the hadith, i.e. what its classification is. فلا يذكر رحمه الله بيان مرتبة الحديث. Then Shaykh Uthaymeen says about the 6 books of hadith, then after the person goes to the 6 books of hadith and others. Okay, so that's with regards to hadith. Another point to mention, Arba'in an-Nawawi, when we were reading them, we stopped reading them in this class, but maybe we might do them in the future. But when we were reading them here, it's important that the student, when he reads the book, also reads the start of the book, the introduction, because there are going to be fawaid in the books, in those introductions, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, then the science of hadith. Go ahead.
وفي المصطلح نخبة الفكر لابن حجر ثم ألفية العراقي رحمه الله.
Good. That's it. So, that's it. So in Mustalah al-Hadith, the science of hadith. So those previous point was with regards to the hadith themselves. You want to know what the hadith says. Okay, now he's talking about how do you know if a hadith is authentic? The history of how the hadith were put together. What are the terminologies that the scholars of hadith use? So this is called Mustalah al-Hadith or Ulum al-Hadith, some people may say. Shaykh Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala mentions here with regards to Nukhbat al-Fikr, he says, it is something like 3 pages. لكنها نخبة إذا فهم طالب العلم تماما وأتقنها فهي تغني عن كتب كثيرة في المصطلح. If a person, although it is small in size, if a person understands it and knows it very well, then it will suffice him from many other books in the science of hadith. And part of that is because the author, rahimahullah ta'ala, categorized things in such a good and beautiful way. Then he goes on to say, Shaykh Uthaymeen goes on to say, ثم قال المؤلف, the author then says, ثم ألفية العراقي وهي منظومة مطولة لكن أرى أن طالب العلم يقتصر على فهمها وأنه لا حاجة إلى حفظها فهناك متون أهم منها. And it is a long poem. ألفية العراقي is a long poem, but I see that a person, the student, should just suffice with understanding it. He doesn't need to memorize it, because there are other books which are more important. Of course, the different scholars have different ways. Some scholars will say, if you have the ability, after you memorize Nukhbat al-Fikr, you go to Alfiyah. So notice so far, for example, he said in Arabic grammar, he said Ajrumiyah. He said in Hadith, you start with Arba'in al-Nawawi. In Mustalah al-Hadith, you start with Nukhbat al-Fikr. And then he mentions the books of Aqidah. Okay. So that means we're just at level 1 now. How many books are there? Remember what the Shaykh first said. He said, memorize and perfect it with a proficient teacher. So for a student, a beginner student, we're not talking about a super student, we're talking about a beginner. For someone to be a student, just those books at least should have been memorized, according to what the author says, not what Shaykh Uthaymeen says, what the author says. Arba'in al-Nawawi, Ajrumiyah, Nukhbat al-Fikr should be memorized on lock in wording, and he should understand it. Okay, how do you know if you understood something, if you know it? I remember one of the sheikhs, student of knowledge, or is a sheikh, I asked him, or he mentioned it in a talk actually, and he said, if you can explain what the author is saying in your own words without having to prepare, then you know the book. How many of us who claim to be students, people that claim to be students, okay, what have you studied? Oh, I know this science, that science. Okay, come, tell us this book. And he says, I need to prepare. So, do you know the book? That's the question a person who claims to be a student of knowledge needs to ask himself. If you want to take the title, then it's good, but make sure that you have the ability to back that up. Okay, as for fiqh,
وفي الفقه مثلا آداب المشي إلى الصلاة الشيخ محمد بن عبد الوهاب ثم زاد المستقنع للحجاوي رحمه الله
الحجاوية.
أو لحجاوي رحمه الله أو عمدة الفقه ثم المقنع لخلاف المذهب والمغني لخلاف العالم ثلاثتها لابن قدامة رحمه الله.
So now in fiqh, the author mentions the following books: The Etiquette of Walking to Salah by Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, then Zad al-Mustaqni' by al-Hajjawi, then Umdat al-Fiqh. So Zad al-Mustaqni' or Umdat al-Fiqh. Same level he's saying. Okay, then what? Al-Muqni', which has differences within the madhab. The madhab which he's talking about is the Hanbali madhab. Then after that, Al-Mughni, for the differences at an advanced level. And all these three, the last three mentioned, Umdatul Fiqh, Al-Muqni' and Al-Mughni are by Ibn Qudamah. Shaykh Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala talks about these books, and really this Shaykh Ibn Qudamah is like a program that he put through. So a program, person starts with Umdatul Fiqh, then he goes to Al-Muqni', then he goes to another book which is not mentioned here, which is Al-Kafi, then he goes to Al-Mughni. Either way, the point is that you go through a book, and you understand. Whether you pick this book or your teacher picks another book, as long as it's a reliable book, it's a well-known book, it's relied upon in the madhab, whatever madhab it is, then the person goes through it. Don't go change from one book to another, which is what we're going to mention in the next part. Okay, in principles, in usul al-fiqh,
وفي أصول الفقه الورقات الزوين رحمه الله ثم روضة الناظر قدامى رحمه الله.
okay, so now in usul al-fiqh, the author says two books, al-waraqat, and then he says Rawdatul Nadir. Shaykh Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala says here al-waraqat, and which is, he says it's upon his name, i.e. waraqat means pieces of paper, and Shaykh Uthaymeen says yes, it is only small, it's a small booklet, and it's not that long. But he says, as for after it, to say after that you're going to do Rawdatul Nadir, then there's a big gap between waraqat and Rawdatul Nadir. That's what Shaykh Uthaymeen says. He says, لكن هناك كتب مختصرة في أصول الفقه جيدة يمكن أن يعتمد الإنسان عليها وربما تغنيه أيضا عن روضة الناظر. But there are many other books which are concise, they're not too long, and they're going to be good, and a person may be able to depend upon them. And then he goes on to say, Shaykh Uthaymeen goes on to say, وأصول الفقه هي القواعد والضوابط التي يتوسل الإنسان بها إلى معرفة استنباط الأحكام الشرعية من أدلتها التفسيرية. Okay, he doesn't mention it here, and I'm not sure if he mentions it in his book. I can't remember from the top of my head now. But the book that Shaykh Uthaymeen mentions in Usul al-Fiqh after al-Waraqat or something similar is Mukhtasar al-Tahrir. There is a book called Mukhtasar al-Tahrir. He says if a person knows that book, he will be a person of Usul al-Fiqh. He will know Usul al-Fiqh properly. The person memorizes and understands that book. He started the Sharḥ of it, but he did not complete it. I think he passed away, rahimahullah, before he completed it. But on YouTube, there is an explanation of this, Mukhtasar al-Tahrir, by Sheikh Sulaiman al-Ruhaili, and it's only 22 lessons. Very good Sharḥ of it. Alhamdulillah, in the sense that it's a very beginner Sharḥ. He just goes with what the book is saying, and he only brings 1 or 2 points extra in order to highlight certain things. So it's a very good beginner's book. As for, like, this is an example I wanted to give. Some people, for example, they will do waraqat. Then they don't finish it, and I say, I want to do Shaykh Uthaymeen's book, Al-Usul min Ilm al-Usul. Then they don't finish it, I want to do Shaykh Abdurrahman al-Sa'di's book in Usul al-Fiqh. And all of these are beginners' books. So instead of moving up to the next level, a person is going through the same level of books. Al-Waraqat, then perhaps Shaykh Uthaymeen's book, and so forth. No. A student has to go upwards. So you pick one of them. You find, for example, your local masjid, there's a sheikh coming and he's going to go for a certain book. He goes for Waraqat, Medina College. Okay, do Waraqat, master it, review the lessons, revise, go to the seminar, revise it, and so forth. And then try to move to the next level up. But as for then you go to another book at the same level, unless there is a specific reason for that, then don't do that. Because you will spend your time, you could always do that and go through the same book. It's like when people they study one sharh of Thalathat al-Usul, then a study after another sharh and another sharh, and they never go up to the next level up. That's not the best way of doing things. But again, if you ever hear me say that and you find a teacher doing that, maybe there is a maslahah why he's doing that for the students. So it doesn't mean that you can just say, oh, what that teacher is doing is wrong because so-and-so said. No, there might be a maslahah, there might be a reason, a wisdom that he sees in doing that. Na'am. Then he goes on to do inheritance. Yes, as for laws of inheritance.
والفرائض الرحبية ثم مع شروطها والفرائض الجلية.
والفوائد الجلية. So the author says al-Rahabiyah with his explanation and al-Fawaid al-Jaliyah. Shaykh Uthaymeen says here, sorry. Let me restart the room, inshallah. طيب. So the author rahimahullah ta'ala goes on to mention in laws of inheritance, and he mentions the book, and Shaykh Uthaymeen says لكن أرى أن البرهانية أحسن من الرحبية لأن البرهانية أجمع من الرحبية من وجه وأوسع معلومات من وجه آخر. That he says, Shaykh Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala says that there is another book, a poem called al-Burhaniyah, he says, which is better than al-Rahabiyah. It is more comprehensive from some angles and also has more kind of information from another angle. And he gives some of that, and that's also printed. He has a Sharḥ of this poem called al-Burhaniyah, which is again one of those books that Shaykh Abdul Wahid gave me from the many books that he gave me, hafidhullah, and maybe one day I'll get to study it, inshallah ta'ala. So he praises that. Then as for tafsir, you with us? Ismail? Allah al-Musta'an, sorry, I've muted myself. But what I was saying is that Shaykh Uthaymeen, in regards to laws of inheritance, he praises a poem called Al-Burhaniyah, and he has an explanation of it which is printed. And one of the benefits of the books of Shaykh Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala most of the time is that you find that he has audio lessons that go almost word for word with the printed books, because perhaps many of the books were transcribed and then edited by the Shaykh himself. So you can benefit from his lessons there. So in laws of inheritance, there's a book called Al-Burhaniyah, which he praises and says is better than al-Rahabiyah, and he has explained it as well. Now in tafsir, Ismail.
وفي التفسير تفسير ابن كثير رحمه الله تعالى وفي أصول
Okay,
التفسير.
so tafsir, Shaykh Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala mentions here with regards to the books of tafsir, he says هو جيد بالنسبة للتفسير بالأثر لكنه قليل الفائدة في أوجه الإعراب والبلاغة. Ibn Kathir's tafsir is very good with regards to, or from the angle of tafsir by the narrations, but it has very little fawaid from the aspect of al-i'rab, grammatical analysis, and al-balagha, issues to do with eloquence. How is this ayah eloquent and so forth. وخير ما قرأت في أوجه الإعراب والبلاغة, and the best, or from the best of what I've read from the angle of al-i'rab and al-balagha is al-Kashaf liz-Zamakhshari. Is a book called, a tafsir called al-Kashaf liz-Zamakhshari. وكل ما بعده عيال عليه, and whatever comes after this book is dependent upon it. فتجد عبارة الزمخشري منقولة نقلا لكن تفسير الزمخشري فيه بلايا في العقيدة لأنه معتزلي. But be careful. Shaykh Uthaymeen is saying, but in the tafsir of Zamakhshari, although it has many good things in terms of the balagha, eloquence and i'rab and so forth of the Quran, he says there are many catastrophes, there are many things that you have to be careful of, because the author was from the Mu'tazila, he is a Mu'tazili. So it's not something that a student, especially not the beginner students, will read by himself, the tafsir of Zamakhshari. Now, and of course, other scholars, they give you stair-stepped ways of learning, or books that you can read for tafsir, and you have tafsir al-Sa'di, for example. For the beginner, the person who's not even a student of knowledge, he can read a reliable English translation, that the one that we normally use at the masjid, and that's a tafsir, because it's giving you the meaning, a translation of the meaning. So the person who translated that looked at the meaning from the books of tafsir and gave you a translation which is dependent upon the meaning. So you can use that as your companion to when you're studying Quran. Okay, usul al-tafsir now, the principles of how to make tafsir. Go ahead.
وفي أصول التفسير المقدمة شيخ الإسلام ابن تيمية رحمه الله تعالى.
So now in usul tafsir, Shaykh Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala adds here, وهو كتاب مختصر جيد مفيد. and it is al-Muqaddimah by Ibn Taymiyyah is a book which is concise, good, and very beneficial or beneficial. Go ahead.
وفي السيرة النبوية مختصرها لشيخ محمد بن عبد الوهاب وأصلها لابن هشام وفي زاد المعاد لابن القيم رحمه الله تعالى.
Sheikh Uthaymeen mentions here أما زاد المعاد, he mentions some things and then he talks about زاد المعاد. فإنه تاريخ وفقه للسيرة قد يكون في التوحيد وقد يكون في الفقه في الأمور العلمية. أي زاد المعاد, if you read this book, it is seerah, but it is bringing you fawaid from different subjects of the seerah. It talks about lessons learned in terms of tawheed from this aspect of the seerah, lessons learned in terms of I don't know, Arabic or whatever the other cases are. I've not studied the book. So there are fawaid that Ibn al-Qayyim brings, and that book has been summarized by Sheikh Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and it's also the summary has been translated partly, if not all. But again, the books that we mentioned here are examples. Your teacher may come, like for example, if you were to study Sirah as a student, probably what you'd memorize if we are together is memorize Urjuzatul Mi'iyah and read Sheikh Abdul Razak al-Badr's explanation to it. That would be the first step. That's it. Or the first step before that would be Foundations in Sirah booklet, which is taken from Thalathat al-Usul, for example. So you start with something that is easier and easier than what is being mentioned here. Yes, as for Arabic language, as for Arabic vocabulary,
وفي لسان العرب العناية بأشعارها المعلقات السبع والقراءة بالقاموس لفيروز رحمه الله تعالى.
Shaykh Uthaymeen says the 7 hanged al-mu'allaqat al-sab'a are poems. He says هي قصائد من أجمل القصائد وأحسنها وأروعها اختارتها قريش لتعلق في الكعبة ولهذا تسمى المعلقات. And he mentions some of them. And also what is added is there's another poem that will be added to these 7 poems. What does it mean? Is a person that wants to study Arabic language, it looks at the old classical Arabic works, and these are 7 poems that were famous and were from the best of poetries that the Quraysh hanged on the Kaaba to show their greatness, the importance of these 7 poems. And also Shaykh Uthaymeen says, also added to this is a poem which is ascribed to Abi Ṭālib, the uncle of the Prophet ﷺ, called al-Lamiyah. And it should be really, Shaykh Uthaymeen mentioned, it should be وهي هذه اللامية يحق أن تكون من المعلقات. This لامية has the right or is worthy of being from these معلقات, these amazing poems. Rather لأنها أقوى منها, rather it is, or because it is stronger than those poems. وأعظم, and it is greater. As for the reading, Sheikh, the author here says, reading in the dictionary, al-qamus, in the dictionaries. Sheikh Uthaymeen says, al-maqsudu muraja'atuhu. What it means here is that the person, goes back to it. So when you need to know a word, you go back and you research and so forth. أما قراءة القاموس فمهما قرأت لا تستفيد الفائدة المرجوة لكن فيه مقدمات مشروحة جيدة في الصرف لو قرأها الإنسان يكون ذلك طيبا. As for just reading it, then you're not going to get what you intend in terms of fawaid, just reading the dictionary like that. But it has some introductory points that are going to be beneficial and that have been explained. I.e., sometimes, this is from me now, even in the tafsir books, if you don't read the tafsir book from start to end, even if you read the introduction of that the Shaykh wrote for that tafsir book, you read what is his methodology in writing the tafsir. Okay, some of the key points, like if you open up Tafsir ibn Kathir and you look at his introduction, you'll see some of the key points that he writes in there. So even though you might not finish the whole book, it's like it has some benefits of usul al-tafsir there. Likewise with dictionaries. In some of the classical dictionaries, you'll see that the introductions, there's some introductory points that they have there that help with sarf. They'll tell you, okay, if you want to know this, then it is on the wazn of this, this, like this. So these introductory points have also been explained and they have benefits within them. So that's another aspect of studies that a person can get into. If you had the question, you wrote a question before, retype it here, inshallah ta'ala. Okay, go ahead.
وكانوا مع ذلك يأخذون بذوق المطولات مثل تاريخ ابن جرير وابن كثير وتفسيرهما ويركزون على كتب شيخ الإسلام ابن تيمية وتلميذه ابن القيم رحمه الله تعالى.
Okay, here Shaykh Uthaymeen mentions فهذا صحيح فغالب المتأخرين عليه وكان شيخنا عبد الرحمن بن السعدي رحمه الله تعالى يحثنا على قراءة كتب شيخ الإسلام ابن تيمية وتلميذه ابن القيم رحمهما الله لأن فيها من التحقيق والتحرير والتقييد ما لا يوجد في غيرها وتحس وأنت تقرأ أن كلامهما ينبع من القلب ولهذا يؤثر في زيادة الإيمان. وأما تمثيل المؤلف رحمه الله تعالى بتاريخ ابن جرير وابن كثير فهذا لا بأس به عند المراجعة. أما كون الإنسان يجعله قراءة يقرأها فهذا طويل ربما يقع عليه وقتا كثيرا. So part of the first part of what was read from Shaykh Uthaymeen's speech rahimahullah ta'ala is that the fact that his teacher and many of those that came after Ibn al-Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah would read their books and kind of study them, because the works that they have in there are the works of somebody who has looked at and analyzed the issues that they are talking about in detail. So they're able to give you qawaid, they're able to give you definitions of things because they have looked at the sources of Islam and built certain foundations from them that you can apply to different things. So this is something that even his Shaykh Uthaymeen says, my Shaykh Abd Rahman al-Sa'di would emphasize for us a lot. And then he was on to mention, and the Imams of the Da'wah, المراد به إمام الدعوة شيخ الإسلام, okay, وبنوه وأحفاده ومن تلاميذه عليه. Okay, yep.
وكتب أئمة الدعوة وفتاويهم لا سيما محاوراتهم بالانتقاد.
As for, I forgot to mention, as for here where it says reading the history by Ibn Jarir and Ibn Kathir and so forth, Shaykh Uthaymeen says, yes, to revise it, to review it. If you need to review certain issue, then yes. But as for actually reading it from start to finish, like setting a set time to read it, then this will take a very long time for a person. Okay, we're going to come to the end of it here. Go ahead in this one. وهكذا كانت الأوقات عاملة في الطلب.
وهكذا كانت الأوقات عامرة في الطلب ومجالس العلم وبعد صلاة الفجر إلى ارتفاع الضحى ثم تكون قيلولة وجوه صلاة الظهر وفي أعقاب جميع الصلوات الخمس تعقد الدروس وكانوا بأدب ذم وتقدير بعزة نفس من الطرفين على منهج السلف الصالح رحمه الله تعالى ولذا أدركوا وصار منهم في إعداد الأئمة في العلم جمع رفيع والحمد لله رب العالمين. فهل من عودة إلى أصالة طلب دراسة المختصرات معتمدة لا على المذكرات في حفظها لا اعتماد على فهم فحسب حتى ضعف الله فلا حفظ ولا فهم. وفي خلو التلقين من الزغل والشوائب والكدر صور على منهاج السلف والله المستعان.
So here, this is the last point for today, and here the author rahimahullah ta'ala has summarized or come to an end of this 16th point in his book, except for one big paragraph which we'll discuss in the next sitting inshallah ta'ala. And this point is the fact that such way, going step by step, the first book in each subject, then the second book and the intermediate levels after they had done the Quran, yeah? Then they had the three levels, the beginners, the intermediaries, and those who were advanced, and they will go through these types of books that the author rahimahullah mentioned. And he says, and through them doing this, having the lessons during the day after the salawat, and then having respect for one another, i.e. being focused, not becoming busy in themselves with talking about this person or being so forth, unnecessarily. If there's a necessity, is different. Unnecessarily. In such a way, they busied themselves and became scholars. A group of them became scholars. So is there not time, Shaykh is saying, is there not a time for us to return to these traditional methods of seeking knowledge by studying and memorizing concise, reliable books, which was the first step and second step that the Shaykh mentioned, the author mentioned. And then he says, and not just relying on understanding alone, number one, not just relying on understanding. Number two, or upon pre-prepared pamphlets, i.e. these are mudhakkarat. The teacher, professor, comes and he says, okay, this is what you're going to be covering this semester, and he has put a small book together. Allahu musta'an. Let's see what Shaykh Uthaymeen rahimahullah ta'ala says. So the author, you can see is clear, this says these two things are not right. And these cause the students to become lost, neither memorizing, because they was relying on understanding alone, and neither did they understand knowledge. Shaykh Uthaymeen says here, هذا صحيح لأن المذكرات قد يكون واضعها ممن لا يعرف من هذا الفن إلا معرفة سطحية، فتجد يلتمس الكلمات من هذا أو كلمات من هذا ولا يكون الكلام محررا متناسقا، لكن هذه الكتب القديمة الأصيلة محررة متناسقة محذومة. Number one, these books that are contemporary books that are written, perhaps pamphlets put together by the teachers and so forth. If the teacher is not someone that's well grounded in knowledge, he may just take words from here, words from there, and it is superficial knowledge. It is like something that is superficial. It hasn't got depth to it. It's not like the books that are classical books or that are written by people that have been studying for 30, 40, 50 years, and not just studying but teaching. Because when you teach something, when you've studied something and then you teach it for many years, decades, you see what works, what doesn't work, what you understand from it, how you understand it. You understand your mistakes that you've made. Whereas if you just done something part-time and you've just been teaching as a professor for 10 years, perhaps, and you're not studying yourself widely, i.e. you're just mutakhassis in one field, and so forth, this can cause the person not to be, when he writes something, for him not to be strong. So it's important then that a student of knowledge goes to these books which are concise, and are relied upon by the scholars for more, for there are known scholars, written by known, well-established scholars, grounded scholars. And the second thing Shaykh Uthaymeen says with regards to memorization, he says, وَمَا ذَكَرَهُ الْمُؤَلِّفُ مِنَ الْحِفْظِ فَالْحِفْظُ هُوَ الْأَصْلُ. Memorizing, that is the standard practice, standard procedure. That is the asl that a student memorizes. فَعِلْمٌ بِلَا حِفْظٍ يَزُولُ سَرِيعًا. Because knowledge without memorization will leave, will be deleted, or will be lost quickly. وَكَانُوا يَخْدَعُونَنَا لَمَّا كُنَّا فِي الطَّلَبِ. And they used to deceive us when we were students. بِقَوْلِهِمْ, with their speech or with their statement, لَا تُتْعِبْ نَفْسَكَ بِحِفْظِ الْمَتْنِ. Don't make yourself tired by memorizing the text. عليك بالفهم الفهم. Upon you is to understand. لكننا وجدنا أننا لم نحفظ شيئا إلا ما كان عندنا من حفظ سابق. But we came to find that we have not memorized anything except for that which we had already previously memorized. فنفعنا الله تعالى بما حفظنا من المتون. And Allah benefited us from that which we had memorized from the texts, from the mutun. ولولا أن الله نفعنا بذلك لضاع علينا علم كثير. And were it not that Allah benefited us from that, i.e. that which we had memorized, then a lot of knowledge would have been lost for us. فلا تغتر بمن يقول. So do not be deceived by the one who says al-fahm, understanding. ولهذا هؤلاء الدعاة إلى الفهم لو سألتهم أو ناقشتهم لوجدتهم ضعفاء في العلم. If you were to, these people that say, oh, just understand, don't worry about memorizing, just understand. If you were to debate them or discuss them or ask them certain questions, you will find them weak in knowledge. ليس عندهم إلا علم ضحل. قال سبحانه وتعالى كسراب بقيعة يحسبه الظمآن ماء حتى إذا جاءه لم يجده شيئا. They are like, it's like a mirage, that you think it is something, and then when you go to it, you will not find anything there. So it's important. Now I know there's some people that will say to you, don't memorize. There are caveats. There are certain times perhaps when you don't have to memorize the whole of Usul al-Thalatha because it's not your language. There are other things that you need to take priority before that. That's true. But if you're going to be a student of knowledge in the real meaning of the word, after you've become a general Muslim, you know what a general Muslim needs to do, then you need to get on a memorizing program, Quran, and then you memorize these tools. As we mentioned the books today, you go through memorizing certain books. And then Shaykh Uthaymeen goes on to mention something about other things. And we stop there. And then next week, inshallah, we'll pick up from there. If a person leaves off their studies for some time, how should they revise to get back into it? Depends. Arabic and fiqh lessons. Depends what they studied, how they studied it, whether they memorized things or not. But he can carry on. He just sets a set time. So for example, if he's getting back into his studies, he'll set a set date for his revision, and then also at the same time start the new lesson. So for example, if it's fiqh lesson, he'll set a set date to revise, and then a set day to carry on with whatever lessons are there at the masjid or whatever the case may be. Same with other things. Quran, he'll start memorizing again, and he'll also revise. But don't just stop new things. Like for example, I'm not going to learn anything new until I revise everything, because that will take a lot of time. والله تعالى أعلم وصلى اللهم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين.